Hey, friends, what a gift it is to be here and to learn from so many great voices, people that are on the ground and listening and learning along with me and others. It's just a joy to receive some of this wisdom, especially from some folks that are a bit younger than me. So grateful for each of you. I wanted to share a bit about some growth in my area around the conversation with respect to inclusion and how I've come to begin to see inclusion along a continuum of belonging. And I'm really captured by a quote that maybe many of you have heard before by Verna Myers, who is sort of an expert in diversity and inclusion. And she says that diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. And I hold that close for one reason. I'm not a great dancer, and I know this about myself. I know that I can fake it on the dance floor, but when I look at other people who are dancing and they look so free and they've got the great moves and the style and the swag and they look so natural, like they belong on the dance floor. Um, and then I gather the courage to go join them on the dance floor because they've said you're included too, and you should come on out, and everyone is welcome. And so I get out there and I start dancing, and immediately I start to worry as I compare myself to them that I look a little bit like a blindfolded T-Rex while I'm dancing, or a Frankenstein after drinking too much Red Bull. Um, I'm exaggerating a bit, but just let me go with this metaphor a little bit longer. I know on the dance floor, I'm not like everyone else on the dance floor, and I'm super conscious of self-conscious about that when I'm dancing. And I know maybe I should lighten up and just let myself go, but my wife and my kids sometimes actually point at me and giggle when I dance. My point here is that I never quite feel at home on the dance floor, and you can invite me to go dance with you, and you can include me on the floor, but I never quite feel like I belong out there. The other dancers might even say, it's fine, Mark. We know you really can't dance, but we still love you. Um, but on the dance floor, I still feel different when I'm out there. Um, so I know this dancing metaphor has its limits, but maybe it speaks to the work that we have to do in the church. Our invitation to everyone and our wide welcome to everyone makes inclusion possible. But inclusion doesn't necessarily lead to a genuine sense of belonging. Inclusion perhaps isn't our end game. Maybe our end game is a culture of belonging, and that's what we really strive for. Uh, we who are privileged in positions of maybe straightness or whiteness or maleness, we we already know what it feels like to belong, and yet we don't get to determine if others also feel that sense of belonging. They they have to tell us whether they feel the belonging, and inclusion is, I think, a gateway toward belonging, but it doesn't settle the question about whether folks actually belong and they feel like they belong. If they don't feel comfortable dancing with us, and if they can't dance without feeling self-conscious or unsafe or somehow other than, I think they'll know that they don't really belong. In the church, we want people to feel a sense of belonging in the community, where they are seen and accepted, where they know that they can be who they really are and still feel safe, where they are not guests at somebody else's dance party, but that they have a sense of equity on the dance floor. So, in my mind, diversity is being invited to the party, and inclusion is being asked to dance. But equity is belonging on the dance floor, because that's when everybody knows that there's more than one way to dance. And I'm coming to see and look for new expressions to say, does everyone in our churches understand that there's more than one way to be human, and more than one way to be a Christian, and more than one way to be in love, and more than one way to be a family? more than one way to read the Bible, right? So if not, then there will always be people in our churches who feel like they belong, and always those who don't quite feel like they belong. And so we can invite everyone and include everyone, but if we assume that there's only one way to dance, and 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 if we assume that that one way to dance is the way that we dance, then others will not quite feel like they belong. I think of the book Life Together, written by Dietrich Bonhoeffer so many years ago, in which he says, the person who loves their dream of community will destroy community, but the person who loves those around them will create community. Here at St. Andrew, every week I make a statement at the beginning of worship. I'm sure most on this call either make that as pastors or hear that from the pews. But for us, what I say is, St. Andrew is an open and affirming and inclusive congregation that welcomes saints and sinners, the lost and the found, believers and skeptics, the wanderers and the wanderers, and families of all shapes and sizes, and people from every point along the faith journey. This is our welcome statement, and it states essentially our values, but it doesn't settle the question of belonging for people. And they will know soon enough if we are simply virtue signaling and appearing to be more authentic than we really are. And so we try to answer at least three questions that I think address the deeper question of belonging. And the first is, who is centered? And I think to Sam's point earlier, we can tend to put voices and persons in positions in order for them to be simply tokens for us to advance our own sense of belonging and worthiness. So the question for us is, are there people in positions of leadership, both visible positions of authority, positions of influence, in which those from the pews can say, that's a person like me, or that looks like me. And so we've intentionally over the years centered queer persons, but not just queer persons, but young adults, people of color on the pastoral team, folks in positions of leadership and as liturgists, people in outwardly facing positions in our community. And this is super hard in South Denver, a suburb called Highlands Ranch. And yet, so insofar as we can be intentional about it, we become more effective at looking for folks, not just to speak, but to lead, and for people to appear as authentic among our community of belonging. For us, the second question might be, what issues and topics are we talking about? And so here at St. Andrew, we create classes and content for our people around topics like gender identity. And I think most of us understand that over the last just maybe 5 years or so, the topic of inclusion has gone from human sexuality per se to something more like understanding gender identity along a wider continuum. And a lot of folks that we are working with in ministry struggle with this evolution of language and understanding around what it means not just to be gay or lesbian or even bisexual. What does it mean to be intersex or transsexual or non-binary? What's the language around queerness? What does that mean? And so we've had a couple classes here around just educating people on the full spectrum of human sexuality and gender identity to round out that conversation. We have had classes here on pronouns and just helping people who are new to this pronoun understanding to sort of figure out why it's important to share our pronouns and what it might mean and why it might be important for those who have different pronouns than our own. And so we've had some classes with folks that have really found some very helpful resources there. We've had classes on queering the Bible, as well as classes on what we call the clobber verses in Scripture around human sexuality. Just a couple of weeks ago, we had a class on critical race theory, um, taught by somebody that we brought in. And we have established here a social justice council that kind of births some of these ideas and concepts. The third question would be, what are we doing really to embody and practice inclusion rather than simply talk about it? Here at St. Andrew, we participate in the Douglas County Pride events, but not just as participants, but as sponsors. And so we put our money there and support a broader effort in our county to advance that conversation. Again, we have a social justice council that we have meet every week or every month. A couple of years ago, we brought in a trainer on race. Her name was Reagan Bird, and she's an anti-oppression consultant. And we did a two-part, 2-week series on understanding race in America, our history of racism, and how to become anti-racist and invest our efforts there. And as many of our churches do, we post banners both outside as well as within our building, not just that would express our inclusion of LGBTQ, but even our inclusion and love for last week, our veterans. And we honored veterans in worship and had banners outside stating that we honor our teachers throughout the year and other groups that would also want to know that they're included in our ministry and in our witness. If I were to add one more question, it would be, what are we doing to protect and preserve the commitment to inclusion that leads to belonging? And as everybody here knows, I'm sure, we experience in all of our churches resistance, not just from inside, but sometimes a painful resistance from outside. Just a few months ago, St. Andrew experienced pretty significant vandalism that was sort of expressly focused on LGBTQ inclusion. Spray paint, we had some banners that were torn down. We had some hate mail. And as a congregation, we had to decide what we were going to do about that and whether we would speak to it generously or reactively. And I was really proud of our congregation in ways that we were able to speak to our people in ways that weren't reactive, but bringing more and more people into a supportive conversation about why we do what we do and the power that it has in our community. I'll finish with this. A few years ago, just after General Conference 2019, as our congregation was engaged in broader conversations about what those decisions would mean for this church, we had a guest that came into our congregation or into our church council meeting who shared thoughts that were not inclusive, that were very hurtful to our congregation, hurtful to me and people on our staff. And this was a conversation that went on too long, and we gave this person a little more time than he merited based on his behaviors. And what we learned in that process was we have to develop some rules around how we deal with, in the moment, how we deal with resistance. And what we've come to decide is we really need, as much as possible, to say, when we have these conversations, the first rule is to do no harm. And that inclusion means allowing those voices to be present, but not to dominate, not to center those voices, but allow them to be heard insofar as they do no harm to our community. So I think others on this call have helped also this this idea that none of us are there yet. And St. Andrew's been a reconciling church for almost 20 years. And we are still evolving and growing in our understanding of what that means, even as the world gets more complex around these conversations. And we have to grow and adapt as well. So thanks for listening. And I hope my thoughts are helpful.